What's up, Packers fans? Aaron Negler here with my good buddy, Andy Herman, ready to talk some football after the Packers' 17-0 shellacking of the Seattle Seahawks. Clearly, Andy, stuff to talk about on the offensive side of the ball, but we'll get there. Let's lead with the good part. Let's talk about the defense. Look, I don't think there's any question now, no matter who's in there, no matter what kind of rotation they're using, both up front and coverage-wise, Joe Barry's defense is hitting its stride. I don't think it's a question of, how good are they? How good can they be? Obviously, middle of the season, still a long way to go, but this is a legit defense.
It certainly seems so, and I don't think you can really argue it after their last three performances against those three quarterbacks. Obviously, everyone knows all the stats by now. I think maybe the most impressive is under 4 yards per play the past 2 weeks for both Russell Wilson and Patrick Mahomes, which is just crazy. And again, especially with the players that are out for Green Bay and have been in and out and so on and so forth. I think with defense, it's not like Joe Barry has invented some scheme that is just unbreakable, right? Every scheme has pluses and minuses. Everything has strengths and weaknesses. But I think on defense, you start with effort and intensity and intelligence. And I think that's where I see this Joe Barry defense really coming into its own. Everyone's on the same page. They're communicating well. Chandon Sullivan, it really impressed me with his level of communication this past week. And then you see it all throughout with the entirety of this defense. You see the hustle. You see players legitimately swarming and, getting to the football. Jonathan Garvin had one where he reversed fields and sprinted all the way down to help on a play where I think one of the safeties, I think, missed on a tackle, but he chased it down and caught it from behind. So when you have players that are playing hard, that understand the scheme, that know what they're supposed to be doing, that are communicating well, yeah, you'd love to have a Jair Alexander in there. Yeah, you'd love to have Kenny Clark not go out here and there. Yeah, you'd love to have all these guys 100% healthy, Z, of course. But if you have the intelligence and the intensity and the effort, it goes so long and so far in the NFL. And I think we're certainly seeing that Joe Barry's getting the most out of this defense and out of these players.
It's funny you mentioned Chandon Sullivan because I was looking at the tape last night, and then this morning I went back and looked at the snap count. Chandon played a lot in that game, and it's funny because I think watching the broadcast, you see the pass interference penalty, which I think, Lockett really sold that a little bit more than what was actually there. But I don't think it's funny. You look at the rotation in the secondary. Kevin King has gotten a lot of pub in the last kind of 48 hours, and people are like kind of waking up to the fact that Kevin's played pretty well. He only played 20 snaps.
I think he got hurt.
Look at how much more look at how much Chandon Sullivan played in that game, and you look at Stokes, and you look at, all the time they spent kind of in past situations. This secondary is really, it hasn't really mattered who's in there. Now, obviously, Rasul Douglas, what have you, they're all playing at a high level. But it's interesting to me that inside, outside, we spent so much time this offseason talking about who's going to play where, etc. Obviously, the injury to Jair, it throws a lot of that kind of into question. How are you going to utilize all these different skill sets? But man, that hasn't mattered who's playing where or how much. They've got a lot of interchangeable parts that seem to really work well together.
Yeah, and it certainly is going to give the secondary, Jerry Gray and really, Joe Barry and Matt LaFleur options as to how they want to match up with certain wide receivers and against certain teams. When Jair Alexander and Eric Stokes obviously have a ton of speed and can cover just about anyone. You've got Rasul Douglas, who brings a little bit more toughness, Kevin King, a little bit more height. So, and then again, Chandon's playing great in the slot. So you have a variety of different ways that you can match up. We know Jair can play in the slot. We've seen Kevin play in the slot. So there's no lack of options. I wouldn't be shocked if all of a sudden we started hearing from Matt LaFleur exactly like he talks about the offensive line of, best three guys or best whatever, get them out on the field. So, but yeah, going back to Kevin King, it's interesting because I was rewatching the game because I don't recall. And apparently I was at the game. Apparently they showed Kevin holding his shoulder at some point, but after that interception, he didn't play again, which you would think, obviously just picked off a ball. And then I was watching the sidelines on the All-22, and it looked like if somebody was going to get hurt, that Shamar Jean-Charles was the next one to go back in. Right. So I'm almost wondering if he kind of suffered something. Now, he did the post game, and we haven't heard anything. So hopefully it's just nothing, and they were kind of being cautious with him. But interesting that he didn't play after that interception.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, for once, it feels like they have some depth there, so it's not kind of where things fall apart if a starting corner isn't out there. It's funny talking about the cornerback position. You move back to the safety spot. Man, what a game from Savage and Amos. Really across all the safeties. I think it's interesting to see how we talk a lot about, cover two shell coupled with, these safeties, they want them to be interchangeable. And lots of coaching staffs give that kind of lip service. But man, these guys, they really do a good job of kind of in both aspects. Although it is funny, you mentioned the missed tackle. I think that was Amos in the left flat when he came down. And he did the old throw myself at the ball carrier's feet trick that we haven't seen much of this year. But for the most part, man, Amos should have had 3 interceptions. But even beyond that, he was all over the back end. I mean, you can't talk about this defense and the level that they're playing at without mentioning how well they're playing at safety.
So I think this is the beauty of the way this defense is playing right now, because first of all, I thought Amos, Savage, and Henry Black all had individually their best games of the season this past week. But you look at one of the reasons that was, well, none of them really had to get down in the box and have to play the run, because guys like Kenny and Slayton and Dean Lowry and Tyler Lancaster and Campbell and Barnes and all those guys, Gary, so on and so forth, we're plugging the box with 6 guys and not allowing the run game to get going for Seattle to the point where you have to drop those safeties in the box. So those guys are able to play deeper, and they're able to play over the top of Lockett and DK Metcalf, and they're able to go and be ball hawks, because if Adrian Amos is having to scream down in the box, he's probably not in position to make a play on the interception. And it's Savage trying to chase that from behind. And it's this defense playing together, and it's complementary defensive football, which we haven't seen in a long time. And I mean, how many times last year, even when Mike Pettin wanted to go with, 6-man defensive boxes or go dime or go light, they just couldn't hold up at the point of attack in the run game. We're not seeing that. These guys are holding up. And I know that the Dean Lowrys and the Tyler Lancasters and those guys don't always get a ton of pub, but when they're eating, double team blocks and holding up as best as possible so that the linebackers can make plays and so the safeties can stay back, there's so much value in that. And I think those guys don't necessarily get the credit that they deserve sometimes.
Speaking of the front, how about the play of TJ Slayton? I mean, he was wrecking fools, especially early in the game. I thought both he and Kenny kind of got winded as the game. I mean, they're big men. It's going to happen. But man, Slayton, I mean, I think he played obviously well when Kenny went down in Kansas City. But man, I thought he played an extremely solid game. Again, it's never perfect, but man, you talk about some promise and some development, and you start thinking about what they can do pairing him with Kenny. Man, that TJ Slayton's is becoming exciting in my eyes.
I think there's 2 pairings that are really, really exciting right now if you look at the long term of the Packers. And I think that's Slayton and Kenny Clark in the middle of the defensive line, and Eric Stokes and Jair Alexander at cornerback. I think those 2, if you look at long-term potential for what this team could be, add in a Rashawn Gary. Savage isn't going anywhere. Like, I know that they're like the purge is coming for this Packers at the top of the roster. We can get into all of that.
We don't want to think about it. No, this ain't, let's talk cap.
I agree.
Let's talk football.
I agree. But I think when you start thinking of some of the fun players and some of the long-term depth of this team, I think it's really fun to think about. And I think Slayton and Stokes go a really long way. Stokes, by the way, man, some of the tape that he put on is legit, like goosebump exciting.
That recovery speed like jumps off the screen.
It's
I can't imagine. I haven't seen him other than camp. I haven't seen him live, but man, you can see it. It's so funny to watch kind of a body just suddenly accelerate. And speaking of makeup speed, how about that job by Savage up the left sideline early in the game, that deep one? I mean, that's, people forget he's got some jets too, and you saw it on display on that play. I mean,
absolutely. And I think, that's one of those where you'd probably like to see Savage stay a little bit safer and make sure he's, staying behind the play and not having to get in that position. But you know what? It's why you get guys with 4.2 and 4.3 speed, is because you know what? Football's not perfect and players are going to make mistakes. And if you have the ability to erase mistakes, we saw it early in the year with Stokes on Jamar Chase. If he has the ability to use that 4.2 speed to get down the sideline and break up a pass where he was clearly beat on, that plays in the NFL. It's like a quarterback who, can, maybe didn't make his first read, but he can escape the pocket and make his second or third read. It's the same thing for a corner or safety. If you have the ability to buy time and, race down the field and break up a play, who the heck cares how you got there as long as you did it.
Speaking of the quarterback, let's talk about the offensive side of the ball, because it was hard to watch for much of that game. And I talked about this a little bit on Packers Daily this morning, and I want to get your take on it. It's interesting. We're coming off of this 2-week kind of weird little phase in this Packers season where obviously there's a lot of outside circumstances, and we've got, Jordan Love's first start, and then you've got a week of Aaron Rodgers preparing but not being at practice, and then you see what you saw on Sunday. And it's so weird because this is coming off a game where I thought they found their identity in Arizona, but it feels like maybe they just were reacting to the fact that they were down a number of wide receivers, including their best wide receiver in Davante Adams. They want to be this vertical passing team, and I don't think they should be, and I don't think they are, and I don't think that's what best suits them. I think their best kind of foot forward is to lean on the running game, like we saw in Arizona, but they seem really reluctant to do that. What's your take as far as the struggles on offense? They haven't been able to get into a rhythm. Why do you think that is?
I think it's finding an identity. I don't think they have an identity. I think last year they played so complementary in offense where one play led to another play later and like everything built off of itself. And this year you don't feel that at all. It doesn't feel like they have an identity. I think football is going through a little bit of a change right now. We're seeing it in Buffalo with Josh Allen and KC with Mahomes, Green Bay with Rodgers, where, yeah, you're seeing, and even I think LA last night is another great example. Right. You see these offenses that want to get, these explosive plays down the field, and defenses legitimately are doing everything they can to simply limit explosive plays and say, you've got to go 15 plays, 80 yards if you want to score a touchdown. We're not letting you do anything else. And if you can get there without screwing anything up with a holding penalty or an interception
power
or
to
a fumble,
you, right?
Exactly. Then we'll tip our cap to you, but you're going to have to put together an 8-minute drive without screwing it up. And it just seems that the teams that are willing to run the football and take the short stuff and be a little bit more patient are the teams that are succeeding on offense. I think Tennessee is a phenomenal example of that. And I'm not saying that it's like a powerhouse offense, but you have to kind of utilize what's available to you. And I don't know that Green Bay has that patience or identity or balance right now. I do think they'll absolutely get there. And I think this week was more of just Rodgers, getting back and things like that, and showing a little rust, whatever. But I do think they have to find something, because right now I think the two things that I would say their identity is either feeding Davante or trying to take advantage of what the defense is giving to them at times. But I almost think like, yes, maybe the run was to the right and Rodgers checks out of it to a quick pass to Davante. And ultimately that's probably a good thing if everything was covered on the right, but it just seems almost disjointed where maybe they were going to use that run to set up a play action or a bootleg later. And now they can't really do that because they checked to a smoke screen to the outside. So I just think it's figuring that balance out. And I still think they have a handful of weeks to do that. And I think they will, but it's not quite there yet.
Well, and that's what's interesting to me too, is the defense is playing so well, and we've been so defense starved in Green Bay, and suddenly to have that, and then flip it over, and you have this offense that is really kind of disjointed, has no flow, no identity, to use your term. It kind of reminds me of 2010, and I know they're not the same teams. I know it's not a perfect, corollary, but the idea that like people, I think, forget how hard they were to watch on offense at times.
That was a defensive team.
That team. Whether it was, the Miami game, whether it was the Washington game, the Atlanta game, hell, the Detroit game where they scored literally 0 points in the first half before Rodgers goes out with a concussion. The final week against the Bears, like there were so many games where the offense was just hard to watch, much like we've seen this season. I still think, and I agree with you, I think there is time for them to figure it out. It's going to be interesting to see how they attack these next 2 weeks prior to their bye. But to have a bye this kind of late in the season, I think almost helps them in the sense of we can really look back on a lot of data, on a lot of scheme, find out what is working, what isn't working, why isn't it working, do we need to junk it, do we need to evolve, etc. I think that's going to be very interesting to see if there's some kind of shift coming out of the bye week, because you can't continue to do what you're doing. Because right now, to me, it just looks, again, like there is no identity, like there is no purpose other than, like you say, okay, we got to make sure Davante gets his. Okay, well, that's great, but that's not a plan, and that's not a way to attack a defense systematically, making sure you're ahead of the sticks, making sure things play off of each other on offense. It was funny because you saw the screen game working gangbusters, and Matt even said afterwards, I probably should have called more. Like, that's a great find. Feed that till they stop it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it just feels like, the shotgun runs and short yardage. It's like every week we find a little thing, but it never feels like it's part of a plan. It feels like, oh, we've discovered something, and it's by happenstance.
I think maybe the oddest thing is just how much spread they've gone this season. And I know, Matt LaFleur had a great answer to it when you asked earlier in the season.
All right. Great answer.
Okay, good. That's all right. At least you had a reason for it.
It was,
but it just seems weird. Like you keep kind of expecting them to come out and, have this balanced run first offense where, you're setting up the quarterback for success and doing all the things they did last year. And it just doesn't seem the same. It's just so interesting.
Well, it's funny too, because watching that game last night, I don't know if you saw any of the Rams 49ers game.
A little bit.
But it's so interesting to watch Shanahan when he's coaching up his offense, and that first drive, 13 plays, what have you, exactly what you were talking about as far as we're just going to run it and run it and run it. We're going to have some complimentary passes, and we are going to do a 8, 9, 12, 13 play drive, and we're not going to screw it up, and we're going to score a touchdown. He's coaching that way, and he's designing an offense that way because he's got Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback. You flip it around, you've got Sean McVay and, by extension, Matt LaFleur, who have these big-armed quarterbacks. Now, obviously, no one's saying that Matt Stafford is Aaron Rodgers, but Matt Stafford has got this arm, and he's got, all these weapons at wide receiver. They feel the need to push it downfield, it seems. And it's like, that's almost, and I think this is the case in Green Bay, you've got this quarterback who we know can make every throw, is amazing, 3-time MVP, future Hall of Famer, but the offense shouldn't be running through him. And I know that feels like heresy to say, but it should be running through the running game. And the fact that it isn't is frustrating, because I think that would open up everything else.
I go back to the Rams game last year. I thought the Rams game last year was almost the perfect way that they used, obviously the Rams wanted to play those 2 high safeties. So they ran the heck out of it and got those safeties to come in. And then that's where you use Rodgers and his explosive playmaking when they're playing single high and you have some of the opportunities to take that shot. But let your run game get situated, take some of the easy stuff, make the defense kind of change what they're doing. Instead especially if they're still in those, 2 high safeties and you're trying to get the vertical passing game going, it's just the antithesis of what you would expect and what you normally see, especially to Matt LaFleur these past couple seasons. So again, I fully believe that they'll figure it out, but it has been just a little bit distracting. And the other thing I'll say really quick is I do think every single one of these games and seasons has its own identity. So if Green Bay's offense was scoring 40 points a game, I can almost guarantee you that Green Bay's defense would not be one of the top defenses in football, right? Because then the opposing offense has to spread things out and they're more desperate to score points. And then we're talking about, well, the Packers defense isn't very good. And it's just a desperation by the other team to have to put up points because Green Bay's putting up 30 plus every game. So I think ultimately, the end of the day, the goal is to win the games. And I think we can get so fixated on some of these stats and stuff. Right now, the defense is carrying the team. And yes, the offense needs to play better. I don't think there's any 2 ways about it. But I think the offense is still, figuring things out. And while they're letting the defense sort of carry them at the moment, which is still a refreshing thing to say for a Green Bay team that has had, 3 decades of Favre and Rodgers, it's fun to see the defense lead it from time to time.
To put a button on it, that game that you referenced, the playoff game against the Rams, is a perfect example of what you're talking about, what we're both talking about, in the sense of they ran the hell out of the ball. And at the end, what was the dagger? Was that adjustment to Lazard off of a single high safety look, because they knew the Packers were trying to run out the clock, blah, blah, blah. There you go, dagger to Lazard. So that's to me, that's kind of the frustrating thing. But to your point, there is a lot of season left, and I do think they'll figure it out. Now we get to talk about special teams. It's your favorite time. Mason Crosby, another missed kick. However, after that, things seem to settle in. Turning the corner here, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see that the protection wasn't an issue, so we get a check mark there.
Put Elton Jenkins out there. I mean, they're like, okay, enough of this.
They're going to bring Bakhtiari back just to be on the field goal protection team. We'll start you on the field protection team if you can handle that.
Work your way up
the tackle, because this is the most important thing that's broken right now. But no, I think that was a plus. It looked like the hold was better. It sounds like the timing was a little bit off still on the kick when Crosby was expecting the snap. I don't have, of all the things, I still don't have concerns with Crosby. I see Crosby miss a kick and everyone on Twitter is like, all right, he's washed up. Crosby's got to go. Is this his last year? So on and so forth. I don't think we are even at the point where we can judge Mason Crosby yet, because everything else has been broken around him. So I have full faith in Mason Crosby that if he gets a snap and a hold and a protection that's all on time and within the function of special teams, that he's going to crush the kick. I just don't think we've necessarily seen that yet. So we'll see. I think that's probably still a kick he could have made. He didn't, but they, like you said, they hit the extra points. Hopefully that's something they can, move on from going forward. There was no other egregious errors. They had a nice kick return to start the game. But I
was going to say, how about that opening kick return? Taylor bringing it up the right sideline. I got all excited.
Small victories.
What else can you do? And hey, Amari caught everything clean. and didn't. He had one that had my heart in my throat a little bit, but for the most part, it was a clean operation, as they like to say. So pointing in the right direction. What do you think about this Vikings game? How do you see them? Obviously, Aaron Jones is going to be out. We know Rashawn Gary is going to try and play through that elbow. How do you see this game kind of shaping up? Because I think this is going to be a hell of a battle, because I know you look at Minnesota's record and it's not very good, but they have been in almost every game right down to the wire. I think they're a really tough matchup for the Packers. I think it's going to be a tough one for Green Bay.
I really do. And one of the things that really caught me this past game, or the post-game press conference, was Matt LaFleur, where he admitted not only his quarterback, but this is a tired team right now. And when you have your head coach saying that this is a tired team and you have a bye coming up in 2 weeks, you can just sort of feel like, yes, everyone has stepped up, but again, some of the Band-Aids and the Scotch tape and everything else is starting to show themselves
off a little bit.
Just a little bit. And I think these next 2 games, if you told me they go 1-1 in these next 2 games, I'd be very, very happy with that. Yep. So it wouldn't shock me if these two were really hard struggles, starting with Minnesota. In Minnesota, this is going to be, I feel like, in a way, a must win for Minnesota, whether they want to be a wild card team or whether they want to, have any delusions of trying to get back at the top of the NFC North. Green Bay wins this and the North is there. It's done. It's over. It's, wrap it up. So I think Minnesota is going to give it everything they got. And I do think the last thing you want to see is a Minnesota team that's just, again, at the end of the day, pretty well coached. They're tough. They're physical. And if you're a tired team on the road going to Minnesota, that's the last thing that you want to see.
I'm just living for the post-game LaFleur Zimmer handshake. That's all I'm about in this life. We all know how that goes. Love it so much. Andy, can't thank you enough for joining me, man. Here to talk some football. Check out Andy on Pack-A-Day Podcast, Packer Report, all the places around the internet, all the green and gold you could ever want. Andy, thanks so much.
Appreciate it.